Annyeong! So, good morning everyone. Welcome to our subject Conceptual Framework and Accounting Standard. And for today, we are about to discuss the Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. So, this is your instructor, Noel A. Bergonia. And let's start the discussion of Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. So, before we proceed proper on the discussion of the contents of the conceptual framework, okay, let's just have some sort of history, no? Paano po ba tayo nagkaroon ng conceptual framework and ano pong version yung ginagamit natin ngayon. So it all started in the year 1989 when the International Accounting Standards Council have created and approved the use of framework for the preparation of financial statements or the framework, okay, on the month of April. Then this particular framework was being published on July 1989. So it was being used as time goes by until such time na yung IASC was renamed as IASB or International Accounting Standard Board, wherein the IASB have adopted that framework on April 2001. So after that, no, as years go by, until September 2010, okay, the IASB have approved the new version of the conceptual framework for financial reporting. Okay? And also again, tumakbo na naman po yung oras, tumakbo na naman po yung years, no? Right now, what we have as the current version is the March 2018 version of the published conceptual framework for financial reporting, okay, or the framework. So this particular version contains 8 chapters, okay, of which for this particular video presentation, we will be giving and discussing the first 5 of the 8 chapters of the conceptual framework. The rest will be discussed on another video. Okay, so let's start, okay, with the content of the conceptual framework. So bago po tayo mag-proceed sa mga chapters, no, the introduction of the conceptual framework contains the status and the purpose of the conceptual framework. Di ba? Buti pa yung conceptual framework may status. Anyways, okay. Ano nga ba yung status as well as purpose of the conceptual framework? So first and foremost, the objective of this conceptual framework for financial reporting or commonly known and mamaya gagamitin na lang natin na term is conceptual framework describes the objective and concepts of general purpose financial reporting. Okay, so this is being used no, in order for us to prepare general purpose financial reporting. Okay, in general, no? And the purpose of the conceptual framework is being listed here. No, we have IPA, which stand for no, the conceptual framework will assist the International Accounting Standard Board or the board lang po no, to develop the IFRS or the accounting standards, okay, which are based on consistent concepts. Okay, so it assists the IASB. Another purpose of the conceptual framework is to assist the preparers, okay, of the financial statements now to develop consistent accounting policies when no standard applies. Okay, so pag walang standard, then the preparers, okay, the financial accountants and the other preparers of financial statements, okay, will use this conceptual framework. And finally, it entails to assist all of the parties, no, whether preparers, the IASB, and other parties, no, to understand and interpret the standards. Okay, so that's the purpose of our conceptual framework based on the March 2018 version. Kung babalikan nyo po yan in the 2010 version naman, no, super dami pa po ng purpose indicated there. I think there are around mga 7 purposes there, but here, no, ginawang concise kasi yung preparers dati nahati-hati pa siya whether auditor no the prepare of financial statements and the like, but this time now we have IPA to assist the IASB, the preparers and all parties involved. Okay, take note that this conceptual framework is not a standard. Okay, so hindi po to accounting standard. Bakit ikanyo, no? Una sa lahat, okay, the title is not starting with IAS o kaya IFRS at saka wala siyang standard number. Okay? So this is a separate one. A conceptual framework is not a standard, nor this conceptual framework overrides any standard. So, ibig sabihin po, in order of priority, no, in a particular transaction or specific no situation, we should use the standard, no, yung mga accounting standards natin, IAS 1, no, IAS 2, and the likes, IFRS. Okay, so we should use them on specific situations. But if there is no standard governing a particular transaction, okay, so as in wala talaga, tinignan mo ng lahat ng standards na available and are still published and used right now, wala po, then the next would be you proceed with the use of the concepts in the conceptual framework. Okay? And technically, nabanggit kanina, di ba, that preparers will develop accounting policies. So, pag wala po sa conceptual framework, of course, we could use the policies na ginawa ng entity. Okay? But that policy are actually in line naman with our conceptual framework and some standards. Okay? So, that's the status and purpose of conceptual framework. No, it's not a standard. It is used to help those people, ISB preparers and all parties, no, in their own way how to prepare the financial statement and to create other standards. Okay, let's have another set, no, wherein the conceptual framework provides a foundation, no, for standards that, okay, it will contribute actually 3 letters ulit yan, TAE, okay. It contributes transparency. Okay, the conceptual framework contributes transparency by enhancing the international comparability of financial information. Aside from that, it helps to strengthen accountability by reducing information gaps, since we could use the concepts in the conceptual framework, no, aside from those in the standards. Then we have also letter E, no, to contribute in the economic efficiency by helping investors identify opportunity and risk across the world. So this is what the conceptual framework provides, okay, for the foundation of a particular standard. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so that's the status and purpose of our conceptual framework. So right now, we are going to discuss na yung mga different chapters. And again, the content of this presentation is only the first 5 chapters, which starts with chapter 1, the objective of general purpose financial reporting. So actually, if you have remembered, no, this objective was already been introduced to you in the video about the development of the accounting standard. But again, let's discuss it since it's part of the conceptual framework. Okay, so the objective of this general purpose financial reporting is to provide financial information. Okay, so quantitative information about sino, no, the reporting entity, okay, the company, okay, that will be helping the various users specifically indicated in the conceptual framework are existing and potential investors, no, lenders, and other creditors. So these 3 sets of users are known in the conceptual framework as the primary users of financial information. And the information generated from the financial reporting was being used to make decisions, okay, for decision making. Okay, so sir, nasan po ibang mga users? Later we will mention them, but for the conceptual framework chapter 1, it specifically started with the primary users, no, in the objective. Okay, so these primary users are making decisions regarding, okay, we have BPE. Okay, ano yung BPE? We have buying, selling, and holding equity and debt instruments. So it refers actually to those existing and potential investors. Okay, their decision regarding the equity and debt instruments that they do have in the company or what they will have in that company. Another decision that they make, no, these primary users are providing or settling loans and other forms of credits. So usually itong decision na to would fall under the jurisdictions of lenders kasi sila yung nagpapautang sa atin as well as other creditors. So sir, ano pong pinagkaiba ng lenders and other creditors? So most likely pag sinabi nating lenders, these are the people o kaya naman companies or financial institutions whom we have borrowed money, okay, as a loan. Okay. However, for other creditors, let's think of it na let's say we have purchased supplies on account o kaya naman mga merchandise on account, we could term it as our suppliers. Even though, no, based on definitions naman that you could found in dictionary, now they are almost the same. Okay, so they are using the information to provide or settle loans and other form of credit regarding the company that they are going to lend their money, 'di ba? Kasi kailangan nilang mabayaran or they are thinking that their money should um, be returned by the entity. And also, another decision would be exercising the rights to vote on or otherwise influence the management action. So this is eventually more on the potential and existing investors. Okay? Because they can really vote pagdating po sa discussion ninyo ng investments, no? In equity specifically, you will have there some sort of discussion of investments, no? Wherein they would have power to vote and have a significant influence over the entity. Okay? So what are the information needs of these primary users, no, in their decision making? So it was just clustered here into two, pero later on we will be discussing one by one pa yung mga specific needs ng mga users. Okay, so in general, these users needs to know about the economic resources of the entity, no, yung mga assets natin, the claims against the entity, mga liabilities, and also the changes in the resources and claims. So it's more on the equity, no? Aside from that, these users also wants to know how efficient and effective the entity's management in discharging the responsibility. Sir, bakit namin kailangan yung financial information to know that? It's because of the fact that, di ba, the way how the management manage or even prepare, plan, and execute, no, on the business will simply reflect on the financial information. So kung maayos yung pamamalakad ng mga nasa management, most likely, no, the company, the business will prosper, and that would be reflected in our financial information. All right? So this financial reports, no, that is known as general purpose financial reports, actually do not and cannot provide information, no? So may limitation yung mga reports na yon. We talk about information related to financial, but this general purpose financial report does not give us, okay, information about general economic conditions and expectations. Wala naman po tayo nakikita sa financial statements natin na about sa economic condition ng buong bansa natin, di po ba? Also, some political events will not be reflected there and political climate, no? And also, the general purpose financial report will not give us the whole industry and company's outlook, no? Kasi nga po, it's just limited to the entity itself, but financial information and not the overall outlook, even yung qualitative approach doon sa company, then it will not be given in the financial reports. Okay? So also, this general purpose financial reports are not designated to show the value of the reporting entity. So, hindi po niya pinapakita. This is from the conceptual framework itself, guys, that the financial reports will not show us the value of the reporting entity or the real value of the reporting entity. Bakit po kaya? It's because later, no, pag diniscuss nyo sa intermediate accounting, yung iba't ibang mga assets or even liabilities, no, you will talk about estimates. And since some parts of our financial reports are estimated, no, such as mga provisions, okay, mga contingencies, okay, estimates yon, then the value of the entity is not actually the real value or the actual value, but it is more on estimated value. But even though it is estimated value, it's still giving information to those users intended to make decisions. All right? So right now, kanina we have the primary users, no, yung tatlo. Ano ulit yung tatlo? We have the existing and potential what? Investors, we have the lenders and other creditors. So also mentioned in the conceptual framework are the other users of financial information, such as of course the management, no? And other parties such as yung government and its agencies, yung mga regulators natin, and members of public, no, other than the investors, lenders, and other creditors. So such as sino po ba? Mga customers, mga employees, okay? Mga mga owners, 'di ba? They are also parties in the company. Okay? So those were other users. So ibig sabihin hindi po lang limited sa primary users yung binanggit sa conceptual framework but rather all of the users, all of us are users. Sabihin mo nga sa sarili mo, user ka pala. 'Di ba? Joke lang. Okay, you are user of financial information. Okay? So when we talk about users, okay, there would be a specific information needs, no, na kailangan nila and they could get from the financial information. So kanina, we have general approach doon sa information needs nila na sinabi natin about economic resource, the claims and the changes, and also the effective and efficient management approach, okay, or disposition of their duties. Ngayon, no, based on the conceptual framework, information needs of the users could be classified under number one, okay, the economic resources and claims. So actually later when we talk about economic resources, it's referring to the asset, the properties of the business, while the claims could be, ang tanong, is it the creditor's claim, so we have liability, or is it a claim regarding the equity or the shares, no? So it's more on equity. So this information need about the economic resources and claims are actually seen on the statement of what? Financial position. Okay? Which is part of the general purpose financial report. Also, changes in economic resources and claims. So usually, no, this is more on also can be seen in the statement of financial position kasi there would be comparability and also the statement of changes in equity. Okay? So, familiar naman siguro kayo dun sa mga terms na yon. And also the financial performance, no, reflected by accrual accounting. So, it's more on the statement of comprehensive income that gives the users that information about the income as well as expenses of the entity. Then, financial performance reflected by past cash flows. So, it's more on the statement of cash flows. Okay, how this particular company manages their cash, saan napupunta. Okay, the users needs that. Okay, especially yung mga lenders at saka creditors natin, di ba? And also some changes in economic resources and claims not resulting from financial performance. So, it would be the other comprehensive income as well, no? Kasi they are not resulting from financial performance or even some sort of economic resources. So, these are the various information needs of the users in accordance with the conceptual framework. Okay? So, any questions so far? Clarification? So, I hope na nasusundan po natin, ha? So, if ever that you have questions, again, please key in your questions to our respective chat boxes. Okay? So the next part of our discussion, no, tapos na po tayo sa chapter 1 which is all about the overall objective of financial reporting or general purpose financial reporting. Now, let's move forward with chapter 2, the qualitative characteristics of useful financial information. Technically, this qualitative characteristics was already been introduced to you way back nung senior high school pa kayo, di ba? On your first few weeks na pagsisimula ng fundamentals of accountancy, business, and management. And also during your first year in the financial accounting and reporting part 1 or the FAR 1, no? Maybe it was being introduced to you. So let's try to discuss it, no, in the context of the conceptual framework. Okay? So in the qualitative characteristics, it was actually subdivided into two parts. Okay, so the fundamental qualitative characteristics and the enhancing qualitative characteristics. So for this particular slide, we will be discussing first the fundamental. Okay, so as you all know, guys, that financial information are more on quantitative, no? Information. But this quantitative information should contain as well qualitative characteristics so that it would be useful for those users na nabanggit po natin kanina. So, as part of the qualitative characteristics, now we have the fundamentals wherein the basic qualitative characteristic that information should possess, no? And they are known as relevance and faithful representation. In the 2010 version of the conceptual framework, it's somehow relevance and reliability pa po, no? Pero this time, relevance and faithful representation. So, unahin natin yung relevance. So, pag sinabi nating relevant, 'di ba? Kayo mismo, pag tinanong kayo, ano yung relevance sa'yo, 'di ba? Ano yung kapaki-pakinabang? So, paano magiging kapaki-pakinabang yung information natin or quantitative information? Okay? If it is what? Capable of making difference in making decisions. So, parang ganito lang yan. Pag inalis mo ba siya or dinagdag mo ba yung information na yon? Okay, na nakikita ng users, will it affect or make any difference in the decision of that user? If the answer is yes, then that information is relevant and is needed, okay, for decision making. Okay, kasi pag wala yon, baka kulang o kaya naman, baka naman po yung decision natin will be incorrect. Okay? So, in terms of relevance, the conceptual framework states that that financial information could be classified as predictive value, meaning yung information na yon could be used to predict, no, some sort of what will happen in the future in your company. Let's say, for example, ikaw po ay mayroong amount ng income ngayong taon na to, no? Okay, so if you're going to use that, let's say to predict, okay, next year, since ganito yung income ko, you will be budgeting yung sales mo, okay, and some other expenses mo. Then, if it used to predict, no, the future of your company, then again, it's relevant na already in your decision making. Okay, so that's how predictive value works. Since we have also predicted kanina, no, the financial information could be used as well to confirm. Kaya mayroon po tayong concept ng confirmatory value wherein that financial information could be used to confirm, no, your prediction. So, or both, no? We could use it to predict, no? Ngayon, maganda. And then, the following year, na-confirm, no, na talagang tumaas yung income natin or even yung assets natin, then that's already relevant in your decision making. Okay? So, or both. So, predictive value, confirmatory value, or both. Also, in the discussion of relevance, no, we need to take into account yung materiality. So from the word itself, material, okay, it means the inclusion or exclusion of that financial information may affect the decision making. Okay, pag sinabi kasi nating material, no, ito ba ay magiging relevant sa akin if pasok siya dun sa materiality level or threshold natin? Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, so before, in my previous company, I worked as a fixed asset accountant. Okay? So sa amin po, may company policy kami na kapag ang fixed asset or property, plant, and equipment nag-fall under, okay, $5,000, okay, pasok siya as asset. Pag hindi or below $5,000, then that would be considered already as an expense. See? That's how materiality works for us, okay, in that company. Okay, sir, napakataas naman yan eh. Hindi ko siya kaya in my company, no? Yes, because materiality depends upon the judgment. Okay, sabihin mo nga sa sarili mo, judger ka pala. Okay? So it depends upon the judgment of a certain company, no, in order for them to execute this materiality threshold. Okay, so sa amin, no, para maging asset siya, then it would be $5,000. So magiging relevant yung information sa amin, masasabi namin na okay, asset siya. So ibig sabihin for future years, we need to depreciate it Okay? Kapag $5,000. Kaya yung laptop, no, yung kasi US company po yung aking ano eh, aking pinagtatrabahuan, no. Yung laptop nga namin, charge namin agad sa expense yun eh. Kasi nga it's below $5,000. Even yung cellphone na iPhone, kahit sabihin natin sa atin sa Pilipinas, it's worth 50,000 kasi binibigay siya sa mga employees, no, on the higher level rank. Okay, so still that's considered as expense kasi it's below the threshold. Okay, so also materiality, since based on judgment, may differ from one entity to another entity. Okay, and that serves as also um, a trigger point namin for relevance of financial information. Kasi pag naging expense siya, okay, relevant lang siya ngayon, expense na siya, di ba? Pag expense kino-close, okay, wala na siyang effect in the future years. Pero pag naging asset siya, then it will be relevant in the future decision making pa rin namin. Okay? So those were the discussions about relevance, okay, of financial information. So aside from kapaki-pakinabang yung information sa atin, okay, or kagamit-gamit yung financial information, it should also be what? Faithfully represented, 'di ba? Buti pa yung financial information faithfully represented, okay? Na humuhugot ka na naman diyan, okay? Dati ito po ay tinatawag na reliability, okay? So pag sinabing faithful represented yung financial information, okay, it is containing these three items, which are number one, dapat yung financial information na yun complete. Okay, so ibig sabihin, from all of the transactions that happened during a particular period, dapat na i-record po siya at na-account po siya in our general purpose financial report. Kasi again, if it is not complete, of course, the basis of the decisions would be the general purpose financial report. Kaya yung magiging result na decision din ng users would be what? Incomplete. Okay? So kaya dapat importante po na lahat ng inyong mga i-record or dapat i-record or even pati i-adjust, 'di ba? Kasi we have adjusting entry, should be incorporated in your financial report. Aside from being complete, no, the information should be neutral. Okay? So, pumapanig ba yan sa anybody? No. Actually, if that particular financial information was being presented in the way that it is biased, okay? Kasi pag ang financial information naman ay as in financial information, it does not contain any bias. Pero kung yung gumawa, no, or even, 'di ba sabi ko kanina, no, we use estimate. So if the estimate was being judged in a biased manner, not in accordance with some certain rules, no, or accounting standard, baka mamaya ginawa nating estimate is in favorable of the company, then it seemed to be biased at all, no? So we don't want to make our decisions out of biased information because it will result to a biased decision as well. Okay, so the information should be neutral or free from any bias. Okay? And lastly, no, para masabi talaga natin na faithfully represented or reliable yung information, dapat, no, it should be free from any error. Okay? So kahit anong mali, dapat wala siyang mali. Okay? So kahit ano po yan, no? Centavo, cents, or even 1 peso po yan na error, or even hindi mo sinama. Okay, so it's already an error. Okay, so we don't want to make a report that is full of error because it will be, again, a result of a decision making na what? Erroneous. Okay, so again, the information should be faithfully represented if it is complete, neutral, and free from any error. Okay? So, any questions about the fundamental qualitative characteristics? So, dalawa lang po yan. Okay? So, nabanggit ko kanina that in the qualitative characteristics, we have also enhancing. No? The second part of the qualitative would be enhancing. So, sa enhancing po, we have 4, no? And that is under the mnemonics of VCAT. Okay? So, hindi ko sinasabi yung pagkain ha. I'm just giving you the way how you memorize it. So you have VCAT, no? which entails for number one, verifiability. Okay? The financial information ba can be verified? Pag sinabi nating verified, it means that can you compute or can you approve that that information is the correct one? Okay? So, bakit po natin kailangang i-verify? So that we could be able to say na correct yung information. Okay? So, out of the consensus of different approaches, okay, tatama ba yung amount na present natin? In accordance with the conceptual framework, no, we have ways how to verify it. We could have yung tinatawag po natin na direct verification. Okay, so pag sinabi pong direct verification, okay, you are going to verify by going into the amount itself. No? So paano po 'yon? Halimbawa, sa financial statements natin, no, may nakalagay doon na merchandise inventory 100,000. Okay? So using the direct verification, what you need to do is to go to the store, go to the warehouse kung nasaan man yung ni-report na amount na yon, and then you count, 'di ba? Kaya nagkakaroon ng physical counting. Okay? So that we could be able to verify that amount is correct, no? Kasi pag hindi nag-match, no, most likely the information was incorrect. Even yung cash count, 'di ba? Sa inyong cash and cash equivalent discussion, malamang sa intermediate, no? You will be discussing their cash count. So whenever that the information presented in the balance sheet, ito yung amount, then dapat at the end of the reporting period, if you try to cash count yung cash presented, should match doon sa nasa financial report. Okay? So that's direct verification going into the amount itself. Okay? While the other one, no, is indirect verification. Okay? So pag sinabi nating indirect verification, maybe there is a limitation as to the direct verification. Kasi nga ho, kung ako, no, magda-direct verification ako muna, no, before indirect. So when we talk about indirect, it's more on recalculation, 'di ba? Meron ka naman records. So try to go to the records and then verify, recalculate, work back yung mga sinasabi ng iba, okay, so that you could be able to tell na okay, tama naman yung present po sa financial statements. Okay? So if the information could be verified, then actually it enhances what? Masasabi mo bang kapaki-pakinabang kapag na-verified mo? Actually, kapaki-pakinabang naman siya, pero verifiability most likely enhances the faithful representation. Okay? So that's the first enhancing qualitative characteristic. Another one would be comparability. Okay, so 'di ba mahilig ka naman mag-compare, okay, ng financial information. Okay, so pag sinabi nating comparability, it's more on checking the differences and likeness among the financial information. Okay, so we tend to compare because we want to know whether that information would be used for our decision making. Okay, so 'di ba ano ba yung pwedeng gawing comparison? It could either be what? Period to period. Okay, so let's say this year's income, compared it with the net income last year or next year, 'di ba? So from period to period or time to time, you can compare it so that you can know whether nag-increase ba, nabawasan ba, 'di ba? Or nagstay ka lang doon sa level mo. Okay? So that's the result of comparability, so that you could be able to make decisions. Okay, kapag bumaba, edi ay baka kailangan kong gumawa ng additional marketing plan. Okay, or even baka kailangan kong i-pursue yung dati ko nang ginagawa para maging consistent ako na tumaas yung income. Okay? And aside from period to period or within the company comparison, okay, we could also have outside, no? We have company to company. Of course, kailangan po pag company to company, you should have a consistent basis, 'di ba? Baka mamaya kasi ikaw ay gumagawa ng, let's say for example, bread, your company is making bread, no? So your financial report is more on manufacturing, and then you will going to try to compare with, let's say, a service business, di ba, na iba yung line ng business, iba rin yung product. Okay, so that's not comparability. Okay, pag sinabi mong comparable ang information, isa pa pong kailangan yung tandaan dyan is dapat parang kayo sa relationship, no? Dapat consistent yung ginamit ninyo, no, na basis. Okay? Consistency entails comparability. Okay, because when we talk about company to company, dapat consistent yung company. So if ikaw is babalikan ko lang kanina, no, making bread, manufacturing ka, so you can compare yourself to a larger na same industry. Okay? And also, pwede rin na same size of the entity kung gusto mo. Basta wag mo pong i-compare siya in those na different yung businesses. And even, let's say for example, you are using IFRS, mga accounting standards natin, pero yung isa, no, you will try to compare it, no, not using the accounting standards, then malamang pag kinumpare mo, medyo magkakaiba ng result. Okay? So once we compared, ang sabi nga po natin kanina, it helps us to decide, and usually it is enhancing more on the relevance of financial information. Okay? Another qualitative characteristic is understandability. Okay? Dapat hindi ka lang mahilig mag-compare, naiintindihan mo rin dapat siya. No, yung financial information, no? The financial information should be easily understood, concise, okay? And could be easily comprehend by those users. Kasi 'di ba, we are going to prepare, sabi natin kanina, general purpose financial reports. So pag sinabi nating general, isa lang 'yun, 'di ba? The perspective of the financial report will be one. Okay, but various users will gonna use it. Okay? So nabanggit natin kanina, dami-daming users, 'di ba? Isipin nyo from one report, they need to have decisions, no? And of course, that particular report should be understood by all of the users. Okay? So we could do that if we're going to use the simple words, no, in presenting, ano pa, yung mga amounts na nasa financial reports natin dapat po supported by computations para yung babasa ng financial report na yon, no, hindi na kailangan magtawag ng accountant in order for them to read that particular financial report. Okay? So pag sinabi nating understandable, of course, naiintindihan mo siya. So, ano ibig sabihin? Pag sinabi ba nating naiintindihan mo, faithfully represented ka na, 'di ba? Hindi naman, 'di mo masasabing faithfully represented. So, anong ini-enhance niya? Okay? Pag naintindihan mo, okay, nagagamit mo. Kaya it's more on relevance. Okay? And finally, we have timeliness. So pag sinabi po nating timeliness, it talks about the availability of the information once you need it. Okay? So magdi-decide na yung users, nandiyan na ba yung financial information na basis ng decision. Okay? Of course, dapat available siya kasi there's a specific time naman, no? Alam naman natin kung kailan gagamitin ng users yon. And timeliness entails, no, that our information, no, pag sinabi ba natin na, okay, timely, dumating siya ng tama. Tama ba siya? Hindi naman, 'di ba? Minsan nga mali siya eh, pag minamadali yung information. So when we talk about timeliness, it's actually more on relevance of financial information that it enhances. Okay? So those are the qualitative characteristics, specifically the enhancing qualitative characteristics na verifiability, comparability, understandability, and timeliness, or our VCAT. Okay? Also, as part of the chapter 2, which is related to the qualitative characteristics, no, nabanggit din po on the last part of this chapter yung tinatawag natin na cost constraints. Okay? So, ang sabi po sa conceptual framework, costs is a pervasive constraint. Okay? So, pinaka constraints, pinaka humahad lang sa saan? Okay? Sa pag-provide natin ng financial information. So, bakit po kaya ganun yung ano natin, particular concept in the conceptual framework na yung costs or yung amount na ginagastos natin in financial reporting is actually hindering us not to provide financial information. It's because reporting financial information imposes costs. So gumagastos tayo, no, in recording, and aside from recording, safekeeping ng mga pinagbabasihan ng financial reports, okay, and you are employing accountants. So those are just some costs, and it is important that those costs are justified by benefits. Okay, so once na gumastos tayo, okay, it should justify our benefits, okay, of reporting the information. Okay, so usually we spend more on the process of collecting the information nga, okay, and also disseminating the financial information, meron ba siya talagang benefit on our company? So most likely, if you see it in questions, it's just like the cost benefit analysis, okay, that your um your benefit, no, your benefits, pagpasensya nyo na po yung sulat ko, should exceed the costs that you have. Okay? So, ayan, I hope naman na lahat ng financial information that we have presented, it is complete, sabi ko nga kanina, based on the qualitative characteristics, no? Pero we should also to think na we need to provide a faithfully represented and relevant information, but considering that the costs is um, small enough or usual enough lang na would not overpower the benefits. Kasi yung benefits na yan, it's more on the qualitative benefits, no, na it would help the decision makers to make and apply their own decisions. Okay? So that's our costs constraints. Wala na pong ibang constraints na nabanggit dito sa standard, okay? Or sorry, conceptual framework aside from the costs constraints. Okay? So that's our chapter 2. Okay, the qualitative characteristics of financial information. So right now, we will be moving forward to the financial statements and reporting entity, which is under chapter 3. Itong chapter pong ito, no, ito ay isa sa bagong chapter na meron in the 2018 version. Since in the 2010 version, wala po ito, no, or nakalagay lang po doon itong chapter na to, pero wala pa pong laman. Okay? So ngayon, meron na po siyang laman. And the first part of it is, again, talking about financial statements. So paulit-ulit na po itong ginagamit in various accounting subjects. But what is financial statements? So financial statements actually are reports, no, which provides information na pinagbabasihan natin kanina na ng ating decisions. And actually, ito pong financial statements na to was the term na dinescribe natin kanina as the general purpose financial reports. Okay? Which contains the information about economic resources, okay, yung asset, claims against the entity, and other changes in the resources that meets the definition of the elements of financial statement. So mamaya, we will be talking about the elements of financial statement, no? Pero for the meantime, these financial statements are again, no, giving us those informations that are necessary, no, for the users to make decisions. Okay? Nandyan yung mga information needs ng mga users natin. So the objective of this financial statement is, aside from providing financial information about the resources, assets, liabilities, equity, and income, no, that will be useful in making decisions for the prospect about future net cash inflow to the reporting entity. Okay? So, yung mga information about cash flows as well, no? Kaya nga may statement of cash flows tayo. And also, assessing the management stewardship, okay, of the entity's economic resource. So, it's more on reflected on the performance, no? Is the company using the economic resources, no, in the right way or in the maximum level so that it would generate benefits to those investors and owners of the business. Okay, so that's how this financial statements, no, works. Okay, and again, that's the objective. Halos pa ulit-ulit, no, sa definition at saka sa objective nabanggit yung mga parehas na term. Okay, so also under the chapter 3, no, it gives us some perspective, okay, that were adopted in the financial statements, okay, on which the financial statements provide information about transactions, no, which are viewed on the perspective of the reporting entity as a whole. Okay? So kung ano yung information about the economic resource, information about the claims, the economic resources, it should be as an entity as a whole. Okay? And it's more on not on a perspective of a group of entities, existing potential lenders and other creditors. So ibig sabihin lang guys na yung perspective natin pag ginawa natin yung financial statements, it entails the entity as a whole. At the same time, it does not pinpoint yung information lang na ibibigay natin doon sa mga primary users. Kasi kanina, di ba, palagi ko nang nababanggit to sa mga previous slides that the information should cater all of the users, not only for the benefit of selected users, since we have created a general purpose financial report. Okay? Are we clear on that one? Again, if you do have any questions, please let me know. Okay? So, itong next na terminology, no, simula pa nung nagsimula kayo sa um, discussion ng accounting, no, you have already encountered this, no. So under chapter 3, okay, financial statements, dun po binibigay yung going concern assumptions. Okay? So ano ba tong assumption na to? So this is actually, as you all know, no, the business or the entity will continue to operate, okay, for the foreseeable future, and no intention, so wala po siyang intention or need to liquidate or cease the trading. So as you prepare the financial report, do not think of it na ito po ay magsasara na, kasi as a general rule, no, the underlying assumption is our financial statements or the financial information should be prepared using the going concern in a continuous manner. Kaya nga ho yung, 'di ba, yung mga income natin and expenses natin, we close that kasi specific lang po siya for a certain period. As part din nitong financial statement is the concept of reporting period, di ba? So we have to subdivide this going concern into reporting periods or smaller units. Okay? So also, in the balance sheet, makikita nyo naman na yung balance sheet po natin, okay, ending balance from the previous period will be the beginning balance of the next period, since again, it entails the concepts of continuance in operations. However, if in case na meron na po tayong intention, no, or there is already a need na magsara tayo, or alam mo na, na-foresee mo na magkakaroon ng violation or compromise doon sa going concern assumption, then the financial statements should be prepared on that basis already. So let's say, for example, alam mo na next year magsasara yung business mo, kagaya ngayon, no, pandemic, no, dahil wala ka ng puhunan, then your financial statements, let's say for example for December 31, 2020, okay, and magsasara ka na by next year, should be prepared already, not using the going concern assumption. But again, it should also be disclosed, no, kailangan mo po siyang i-disclose yung information if you have not abided dito sa going concern assumption natin. Okay? So another part of this chapter 3 is the reporting entity. Okay, so kanina we have talked about the financial statements which the users based their decisions. At sino po yung nagpo-provide ng financial statements? Eventually, it is the reporting entity or the business. So in the conceptual framework, the term reporting entity refers to the entity that is required, okay, or chooses to prepare the financial statements. So they are single or single entity or portion of the entity or uh, more that can comprise of more than one entity. Okay, so again, they are the provider. Kaya nga po sinasabi parati rin in some other subjects that the management is the responsible person, no, in providing the financial statement, since they are representing the reporting entity or the business itself. And take note, in accordance with the conceptual framework, our reporting entity, okay, is not necessarily a legal entity. Okay? So, kasi baka mamaya isipin ninyo, it's more on, 'di ba, pag sinabi natin legal entity, it's more on law, 'di ba? It's not the case that reporting entity could be based on a usual entity, no? Hindi naman sinasabing illegal entity, no? Actually, pwede rin naman kasi based on the wording, so not necessarily legal entity. So, pwedeng illegal entity, pwede rin siyang usual entity, no? That's not entail na it follows the legal aspects of the law. Okay, kasi yung corporation, di ba, it's based on law. Artificial being created by law. Yung partnership, based on law rin siya. Yung sole proprietorship naman, business din siya. No? It's legally registered naman sa mga ano natin, mga government agencies. Okay? So, not necessarily ha. So, pag nag-true or false tayo, take note of this one. Baka sabihin ko sa true or false, okay, a reporting entity is a legal entity. Pag sinabi ko, a reporting entity is a legal entity, true pa rin yun kasi sinabi niya lang na legal entity. Pero, pag ito na, no, a reporting entity is necessary a legal entity, okay, false na yun. Kasi sabi dito sa conceptual framework, it is not necessarily a legal entity. Okay? So as part as well of the discussion in chapter 3, okay, about the financial statements, no, and reporting entity, it gives us idea about financial statements and its type. Okay, so wherein we have a parent and subsidiary relationship. By the way, no, kapag merong parent or subsidiary relationship, ibig sabihin, halimbawa, no, example natin ng parent and subsidiary relationship. Let's say, for example, we have Jollibee Food Corporations and it has its subsidiaries. Ano ba yung mga subsidiaries niya? You have what? The Greenwich, 'di ba? Si Greenwich ay subsidiary nun. Okay, ano pa? Red Ribbon. Okay, so also we have Mang Inasal, pero si Mang Inasal kasi it's already 100% owned ng Jollibee Food Corporation. Okay, so pag move forward po ninyo sa accounting for business combination, pagdating ninyo ng third year, you will encounter the discussion of subsidiary parent relationship. So it's actually one subject because of the business combination. But in the conceptual framework, it's just giving us the idea about what are the types of the financial statements if there is a parent-subsidiary relationship. Okay? Ang parent dito sa case natin is si Jollibee Food Corporation since binili niya or may investing, may power siya, no? May control na siya over the other companies. Okay? So, when we talk about types, we have number 1, consolidated financial statements. Okay? So pag sinabi natin consolidated yung financial statements, no, yung information na laman nun about the resources, the claims of the entities, the income and expenses are reported for both parent and subsidiary as a single reporting entity. Okay? So, ibig sabihin nun guys, itong parent na to, 'di ba? At saka itong mga ito na subsidiary. So, pag nag-present sila ng tinatawag na consolidated financial statements, iisang FS na lang po ang ipe-present nila at yung FS na yon ay naglalaman na ng parent at saka subsidiaries financial statements. Okay, kasi malamang sa malamang ang gagawin nitong mga subsidiary na to kasi these are also separate companies but under one parent, no, they will prepare financial statements. Pero kapag nag-release po ng consolidated financial statements, by the way, kaya nga po kayo merong standard na IFRS number 10, if I'm not mistaken. Wait lang, let me double check. That is IFRS number 10, consolidated financial statements. Yeah, correct. IFRS number 10, no? A standard governing the way how to present the financial statements, no, in a consolidated manner. So they are presenting already as a whole yung kanilang mga financial reports entailing for a single set of reporting entity. Okay? So are we clear on that, on the consolidated? Okay. So paano naman po kung hindi po pagsasamahin, no, yung financial reports natin ng parent at saka subsidiary? Okay, by the way, proceed muna ako sa consolidated. Here in the Philippines, most of the financial statements pag may parent and subsidiary relationship are being presented in a consolidated level. So pag nag-search kayo ng Jollibee Food Corporation financial statements, you can see there nakalagay doon consolidated financial statements. Again, it's because it includes already the subsidiary. Okay? However, no, not all of the time consolidated financial statements were prepared, no. We have as well unconsolidated financial statements. At pag sinabi nating unconsolidated financial statements, no, it's a financial statement of the parent, okay? Pero sabi dito, no, it is not about those of its subsidiary. So, gumawa si parent ng kanyang financial statement. So, dito sa example, Jollibee Food Corporation, Okay? And then gumawa rin si Greenwich, si Red Ribbon, si Mang Inasal. So this subsidiary will have their own financial statements na ipe-prepare. Okay? And they will report that separately. And the parent will also prepare it separately and report it separately without including the subsidiary. Kaya parent lang po yung nakalagay dito, no? Because again, the financial statement is considered as unconsolidated. Okay? And lastly, no, paano naman kung merong businesses that does not, okay, sabi dito, two or more entities that are not all linked by parent or subsidiary relationship. So wala silang yung parent wala siyang control over the other, no? Anong mangyayari? At paano kung ipag-combine nila or pagsamahin nila yung financial statements nila? Sir, bakit gumagawa ng ganun? It's because of the fact that the conceptual framework states na possible po na magkaroon tayo ng combined, no, na financial statements. Okay? So if the financial statements are being combined in one reporting entity, but it is comprised of various entities that are not linked by a parent or subsidiary relationships, then it means combined financial statement. Actually, I haven't encountered yet, sa totoo lang, yung combined financial statements. I have seen already consolidated and unconsolidated, no? Usually kapag sinasubmit sa Securities and Exchange Commission at may parent and subsidiary relationship, especially here in the Philippines, we use consolidated. Pero in US nung part pa ako ng private company, no, they are also preparing unconsolidated for the purpose of their specific state kasi 'di ba sa US may mga states. Okay? So depende yun sa entity. But again, I haven't experienced yet combined financial statement where various entities that does not have parent or subsidiary relationship, okay, will have their financial statement to be in one reporting entity. Okay? So those were the types of financial statements in accordance with chapter 3. Okay? So again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to key in your questions to our respective chat boxes. I know, no, it's already 1 hour, no, yung video na to. So if you want to relax, no, you can sit back there. Okay, pause mo muna to and then kumain ka muna or go to the CR or whatever you want. But do not forget, we still have 2 chapters here in this presentation. Okay, I hope natapusin mo to, tong discussion na to. Okay, so let's move forward with another chapter. Okay, which is entitled, ayan, Elements of Financial Statements, which is the chapter 4. I know, guys, that in your basic accounting, no, and other subjects, you have already discussed the elements. At alam kong familiar na kayo dyan. But let's discuss these elements in line with the concepts, no, and the theories discussed under the conceptual framework. Okay? So let's start with, okay, alam naman ninyo, 'di ba, that we have 5 elements. We have asset, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses. Okay? So let's start with asset as the first element, wherein dati, no, an asset is an economic resource, no? Mahaba yung definition, but in the 2018 version, no, ito na lang po yung definition ng asset. So asset is a present economic resource, okay, a property of the business. Kaya kanina previously, no, lahat ng users information, it gives us economic resource as a clue, no, controlled by the entity. So it is controlled by the company as a result of past events. So mamaya isa-isahin natin yung discussion na ano ba yung controlled, ano po ba yung as a result of past event at saka yung economic benefit na napoproduce dito. Okay, but based on the definition, it says there is an economic resource. At ano po ba ang economic resource? Okay, in accordance with the conceptual framework, economic resource is a right. Okay, mamaya may separate din yan. Hihimay-himayin natin yan. It is a right that has a potential to produce economic benefits. Okay, so that's our definition of economic resource. Ano po ba yung definition dati ng asset? So dati, ang definition po ng asset, no, is a resource controlled by the entity as a result of past events and from which economic benefits are expected to flow from the entity. So dati po yung to produce economic benefit was included in the definition of the asset. But right now, no, medyo nagkaroon ng change in the definition, and that economic resource benefit, okay, was discussed on a separate definition. Okay, so on the next slide, we will try to discuss, no, ano nga ba yung sinasabi na controlled at paano po ba yung right, okay, and also what are the potential economic benefits of our entity. Okay, so simulan natin yung asset, which is a present economic resource controlled by the entity, no, as a result of past events, by discussing, okay, number one, right. Okay, so pag sinabi po nating right, di ba kanina sinabi doon, an economic resource is, okay, a right. So right means that it has a potential. Okay, ito yung cursor ko. Asan yung cursor? Sorry. So ayun. So when we talk about rights, it have the potential to produce economic benefits in various forms. Okay? So it could be either to correspond to an obligation of another party. So a right, no? Kasi not most of the time an asset is not fully controlled by the entity, but rather it has only given the right to use that asset. Okay, so pero if that particular right correspond to an obligation to another party, then of course it entails economic resource, and that economic resource will be an asset. Okay, and what are those rights? Okay, rights to receive cash. Actually, this will be discussed in your receivables, no, because receivables are contractual rights to receive cash. Okay, so receivable is an asset. Okay, rights to receive goods or services. So it's again more on receivables natin. Okay, rights to exchange economic resource with another party on favorable terms. So we have other financial instruments na part din ng ating assets, no? Such as yung mga equity investments and debt investments, which are having favorable terms to the entity, and also, no, rights to benefit from an obligation of another entity to transfer economic resource if specified uncertain future events. Okay, so also as part of it, no, would be yung tinatawag natin na right of use asset. Pagdating ninyo sa intermediate accounting 3, you have the leases. Okay, tapos yung asset na i-record ng lessee was the right of use asset, and that is actually considered as an asset because it corresponds to an obligation of another party. Okay, to provide for the use of the asset na hindi naman owned by the company. Take note ha, hindi sinabi sa definition that the asset should be owned by the company. It should only be controlled by the company, di ba? Or the entity. Tama ba? Kasi there would be in the other discussions nyo sa intermediate accounting that the asset is really owned by another party, no? But you can control it since binigyan ka ng right to use that asset. Okay? Another on the definition of rights under the conceptual framework is it could be a right if it does not correspond with obligation. Kanina kasi correspond with obligation eh. So there is a party, other party involved. Ngayon po, we have the rights over other physical objects, no? Such as the right to use the property, plant, and equipment na binili natin. And also the right regarding the inventories that we are selling. Okay? So sabi dito, such as the objects and rights and benefits on the leased object. Okay, residual value on the lease object. So leases, nandito rin pala siya. And also the rights to use intellectual property. So sa intangible assets naman. Okay, so those were the rights considered under the definition of an asset. Okay, so another component also. Okay, rights pa rin po tayo, and let's try to discuss yung mga ibang paragraphs na incorporated sa rights. Okay, so in paragraph 4.8 of the conceptual framework, no, the entity, sinabi doon that an entity's right to obtain economic benefit produced by such goods or services exists momentarily until the entity consume it. So, technically, binibigyan ka ng right or meron kang right over that asset, but it will exist up to those time lang na na-consume mo yung asset. Kasi pag wala na yung goods or services na yon or asset na yon, then of course, you will not have the right anymore. Mamaya, we will be discussing derecognition, and because you have already derecognized or consumed that particular asset, then there will be no economic benefits anymore. Okay? In paragraph 4.9, not all entities' rights are assets of the entity. So as mentioned to you a while ago, it will be an asset of another entity on which you are only given the right to use it. In paragraph 4.10, an entity cannot have the right to obtain economic benefits to itself only. Okay, so paano po ba yun? It does not have the right or cannot have the right to obtain itself. So, just like that instruments or equity securities na i-discuss niya sa intermediate accounting 2, no? Wherein it is being issued by the entity and sometimes it could be repurchased. So, nire-repurchase niya. Eh, ano ba yung nangyari kapag repurchase? Let's say for shares, di ba? Pag meron tayong shares at nire-purchase natin, naging treasury shares. So, actually, that treasury shares na inacquire natin was not actually an asset, di ba? Because it's a deduction nga sa inyong equity. So that's an example of the right that cannot obtain economic benefits from itself. So reacquisition yung example natin dyan. In paragraph 4.11, in principle, each of an entity's right is separate asset. Okay, so hiwa-hiwalay na asset yan depending upon the clustering in the financial statements. However, for accounting purposes, okay, related rights are often treated as single unit of account that is a single asset. So later no after natin ma-discuss yung liability if I'm not mistaken, okay, so we will have to discuss their unit of account wherein similar rights, similar obligations could be accounted for as one because we have the concept of unit of account, no, and we could treat that as single asset dito sa asset natin and also a single liability for liabilities. In paragraph 4.12, no, in many cases, the set of rights arising from legal ownership of physical object is accounted for as single assets. So conceptually, the economic resource is set of rights, not physical objects. So it would be set single asset but set of rights. No, nevertheless, describing the set of asset as a physical object will often provide a faithful representation of those rights in the most concise and understandable way. So set of rights arising from legal ownership could be accounted for as single assets. Okay? Ano po ba yung mga example natin ng mga legal ownership natin? So let's say for example, yung mga intangible assets, 'di ba? We have the right regarding the intellectual properties, we have the right over copyright, ano pa, mga ano pa ba yung mga sa intangible assets? We have as well yung right to use the name of the other company such as trademark o kaya naman franchise. Okay, so they could be accounted as a single asset, intangible asset in our financial statements. Okay, then 4.13, in some cases, it is uncertain whether the rights exist. Oh, di ba? Okay, uncertain ka na nag-exist ka pala, joke lang. Okay, so there would be uncertainties that would give rise no, to a particular right, but technically, that uncertainty, okay, will be resolved if there is already a particular action over that um, uncertain rights. Okay, so example of which is madidiscuss nyo to as part of provision IAS number 37. Tama ba? IAS 37 for the provisions, contingencies, and contingent assets. Okay, so there would be assets that will be kumbaga uncertain na syempre kagaya nun, di ba, kinasuhan mo yung isang um, company, no? Tapos, supposed to be, dahil wala pang court ruling, hindi mo alam whether mananalo ka, no? Kasi babayaran ka ba niya? Kasi baka matalo yung other party, you are uncertain that you will get that amount, no? So hindi mo pa siya pwede agad i-record as receivable since there is still uncertainty until such time that it meets the already requirement or definition of being an asset, then saka pa lang siya magiging asset. Okay? So there will be examples and discussions of that items on your intermediate accounting. Okay? So rights can also be uncertain, kagaya ng pagmamahal niya. Joke lang. Okay, so that would be all about the rights. Ngayon naman, the next element or part of the definition kanina is all about the potential to produce economic benefit. So kung babalikan natin yung definition kanina, di ba? An economic resource which is an asset, okay, is saan yung cursor ko? Is a right. Okay, so na-discuss na natin yung right. Okay, so it's either an obligation, no, a right that is more on legal and not legally binded rights, okay, to have potential to produce economic benefits. So on this particular discussion, okay, so we will be talking about how could we say that there is a potential to produce economic benefits. Okay, so mamaya yun on the next slide. A right can meet the definition of economic resource, okay, as discussed kanina, hence can be an asset, and if the probability, okay, that it will produce economic benefit is low. So the point there is yung potential to produce economic benefit, it could either be high or low, but again, even though low po yung ating produce of economic benefits, basta it produces an economic benefit, then that's still an economic resource which could give rise to an assets. Okay? So baka mamaya kasi mahina lang yung inflow ng resources, okay, because of that asset, maybe it's not yet that good. Okay, kailangan pang i-manage well, then okay lang po 'yan for as long as there is a produce of economic benefits. Now, how do we say that there is a potential to produce economic benefit based on the conceptual framework? So, an economic resource could produce, okay, an economic benefit from an entity by entitling or enabling, okay, it to do, for example, one or more. So we could derive benefits by number one, okay, received contractual cash flows or another economic resource. So if we could be able to get cash, okay, such as yun nga yung receivable, 'di ba? It's a right to receive cash. So if you can get cash because of that, then that would be a potential benefit to receive cash or even other resources in exchange of that, no, mga equity instruments, no, and some other assets. Okay. Also, exchange of economic resource with another party on favorable terms. Okay, take note ha, favorable, that would be an asset. Kasi pag unfavorable yung mga nakalagay dyan, most likely that will be classified as liability. Okay, to produce cash inflow and to avoid cash flows. Okay, so that would be a source of benefit, just like the receipt of contractual cash flows. Bakit to avoid cash outflows? Kasi we are talking about potential benefits that is causing us to have an economic resource. So it's focusing more on the asset, guys. Pag cash outflows kasi, more on it will be part of the liabilities. Okay? Receive cash or other economic resources by selling the economic resource. So, pag nag-discuss kayo ng, let's say, property, plant, and equipment, if you're going to sell it, no, then you can receive cash o kaya naman another asset, no, in exchange. Okay? And then also, to extinguish liability by transferring economic resources. So, let's say, for example, your particular asset, okay, is being received by the extinguishment of liability. Okay, so those were the definition or the ways how we could say that it would have a potential to produce economic benefits. Okay, so as you can see, it's more on how you received, okay, that particular asset in favorable term. Okay, and actually guys, these are just example based on the conceptual framework. Now pwede pa pong magkaroon ng others, no, in the discussion of individual assets that you have in intermediate accounting. Okay. Another premise about being an asset kanina, no, is that the entity should control that asset. So let's try to discuss about control. How does the entity have the control over the assets? So assessing whether control or exists will help to identify the economic resource for which the entity accounts. Okay, so is the company controlling using that asset? Okay, it has the ability to drive that particular benefit para sa kanya. Okay, so that's control. And entity controls the economic resource if it has the ability, okay, nabanggit ko na, to direct the use of economic resource and obtain the economic benefits that it may flow. So, you have the control pag nakukuha mo yung benefits. Pag other entity, then, okay, sabi dito, for an entity to control it, no, it should have the access over the economic resource, okay, either directly or indirectly rather than to another party. So pagkalimbawa yung benefit ay nakukuha ng other party, let's say for example, you have a um, franchise, for example, no, franchise is part of the intangible assets, and then you are kumbaga selling products by using that franchise. Of course, you have an inflow of resources, no, kapag ang nabibenefit na lang ultimately, no, is, or yung dapat nakikitain mo is more on pumupunta sa franchise, then that is not control already. So even though you are not, nabanggit ko kanina, no, owning that particular asset, but if you have the control that you could direct the resources or the output or the potential benefit to your company, then you have the control on it, thus it will become your asset. Okay, so sabi rin dito, no, controls of economic resources usually arises from an ability to enforce legal right. So in terms of receivables, di ba, contractual right to receive cash, no, you could be able to sue somebody, especially for notes receivable, di ba, since you have the legal rights over it, no. Also for inventories, you are the one who are owning it, no, thus you have the legal right over it as well. So also having exposure to significant variation amounts of benefits. So again, more on napapansin ninyo, may legal right. So pag may right ka, you have the control. Pag nadadirect mo yung benefit na diniscuss din natin kanina, you have the control. So parang ganun yung essence nitong dinidiscuss natin ng mga paragraphs under the control, no? So ayun po, no, kahit po varied amount or hindi po consistent yung amount natin for the economic benefits, but you can have that economic benefits produced, then you have the control over the asset. And lastly, no, a principal, okay, may engage an agent to arrange sales of goods controlled by the principal. So if an agent has the custody of the economic resource controlled by the principal, the economic resource is not an asset of an agent. Actually, this last part of this discussion about control, example ko po niyan, no? I think on the final examination of your intermediate accounting about inventories na lang, no, there was a principal agent concerns doon. So let's say for example, you have the consignor. Okay, halimbawa merong goods na pinapabenta. Familiar ba kayo dun sa pinapabenta? Okay, so halimbawa meron tayong product, no? Si product mo ay si product X. Okay, product X. Pagmamay-ari siya nitong tinatawag natin na consignor. Okay, or that is actually your principal. Okay? Tapos, ang gagawin, ipapabenta niya doon sa tinatawag na consignee. Okay, consignee. So this is now your agent, and the agent will sell the product, okay, to the final customer. Okay? So ang nangyayari dito, pag tinanong kayo sa inventories, no, in your discussion of IAS number 2, okay, who owns the asset? 'Di ba? Itong product X na to, binigay ni consignor kay consignee para ibenta, okay? Or pinagkatiwala niyang ibenta kay consignee, okay, to the final customer. Okay, so who owns the asset? Sabi dito, 'di ba? The economic resource is not an asset of the agent. Actually, pagdating sa inventories nga, okay, pag tinanong kayo who owns the asset, the answer will still be the consignor. Okay? So the consignor owned that asset. Okay, and it has the right over the asset. So pwede niyang bawiin kahit anong oras mula kay consignee yon. Eh sir, anong mangyayari kay consignee? Actually, the consignee or the agent will just receive commissions, 'di ba, for selling the product, but it doesn't own, 'di ba? Kaya nga nangyari sa mga consignee pabenta is, 'di ba, kapag hindi na ibenta, binabalik kay consignor kasi pagmamay-ari pa rin talaga 'yon ni consignor. Okay? So that's an example of this discussion that the agent could not own the particular asset since it does not direct the control. Okay, kasi yung benefit pa rin, okay, nitong pag-sale nitong product X, even though the consignee will receive commissions, will fall under the consignor or the principal. Okay, so I hope that helps the discussion over the control of an asset. Okay, so we're done with assets. Okay, so now let's move forward with liabilities naman. So the second element would be the liabilities, okay, which is dati, no, it's a present obligation arising from past events, the settlement of which is expected to have an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits. So medyo mahaba-haba, and that is the definition in the 2010 version. Okay, but in the 2018 conceptual framework version, no, umikli lang konti, pero it contains the various elements, no, or criteria such as it is a present obligation pa rin of an entity, okay, mamaya didiscuss din natin isa-isa yung component niyan, to transfer economic resource as a result of past events. So, as part of this definition, okay, you must meet all of the criteria to become a liability. Okay, so sabi sa definition, okay, it is an obligation. Okay, a present obligation. Okay, and the obligation is to transfer economic resource. So we need to transfer, di ba? Economic resource is the asset. So either we pay it through cash or other economic resource non-cash assets. Okay, and also it is a present obligation that existed because of past events. Okay, so may nangyari dati, thus this time, no, it has liability from your end. So let's try to discuss one by one this criteria, okay, in the next slide. So in essence, no, pag sinabi natin liabilities in basic accounting lang na konsepto, it's an obligation. It's an amount that we need to pay to some other parties. But this is the more formal definition of liability. Okay? So let's start that the liability is a present obligation. So unahin muna natin, okay, what is an obligation? So sa oblicon ninyo, hindi po ba? Okay, favorite subject niyo, alam ko. An obligation is to do or not to do. Okay, a certain thing. In the conceptual framework, it defines obligation as a duty or a responsibility that an entity has no practical ability to avoid. So it has a responsibility to fulfill that particular obligation. And the requirement of this obligation, no, that one party will recognize a liability, and to measure does not imply the other party must recognize an asset of the same measure or an amount. So meaning, siyempre liability, we are the one who needs to pay, di ba? We have the obligation to give or to pay economic resource. But it does not necessarily, sabi nga dito, and imply that the other party will recognize an asset or measure at the same amount. So meaning, on our part, it would be liability. In the other party, it could be um, an asset already or not yet an asset because baka hindi na-meet pa yung requirement no being an asset, and also no yung amount may vary as well. Okay? So there are different types of obligations, no? Alam ko in the oblicon ninyo, no, marami pang types ng obligation, but let's just define it by what the conceptual framework stated, no? Sabi dito sa conceptual framework that we have two types of obligation. It could be legal obligation. So pag sinabi nating legal obligation, it could either be an obligation based on contracts, 'di ba? Yung nasa oblicon ninyo, or other legislation and other similar means of legal enforceable by parties. So more likely, pag sinabi nating legal, it's more on backups by law. Tama? Na mga obligations. Okay? Ano ba yung mga sample na backup obligations natin at legal, 'di ba? Let's say for example, promissory note. We issued promissory note. So thus we could have the need to pay our liability, and we record that actually as notes payable, 'di ba? Even bonds payable, they are bounded by contracts and legislations. Okay, mortgage payables. Even actually accounts payable is a legal obligation since we are having the responsibility to pay the goods that we have purchased on account. Okay, so those are legal obligations. Next would be constructive obligations. So pag sinabi po natin constructive obligation, it's not based on law, but rather it is based on entities' customary practices. So it's more on the published policies ng entities, no, that they will have an obligation if this something existed. Okay, so example po ng constructive obligation would be let's say for example sa intermediate accounting, if I'm not mistaken, intermediate accounting 3, tama? Okay, so let's say for example, environmental cleanup. Okay, halimbawa, no, kapag let's say company ka ng oil spill, company ka na nagbebenta ng oil, no, or gas. Okay, and then bigla nagkaroon ng oil spill. Okay, so technically in your policy you need to clean that up. Okay, of course the certain amount of cleanup pag diniscuss nyo to sa intermediate accounting 3 would be considered already as a liability. Okay, and that is an example of constructive obligation. Warranties in the older discussions are also considered as constructive obligations. Okay, so they are not based on law but rather on the customary practices of an entity. Okay, so those were the obligations. And also, obligations, take note that entities' duty to transfer economic resources may be conditional on a particular period for future actions. So, pag nasa discussion na kayo ng liability, so inuunahan ko na, di ba? That when we talk about obligation, about conditional, so pwede rin ninyo madiscuss. Actually, hindi pala liability to. Madidiscuss din to sa IAS number 20, which is, example ko lang to ha, okay? IAS number 20, accounting for government grant, that you will also discuss as part of your PPE sa Intac 1, okay? So, in this case, no, if ever that there would be conditions, halimbawa, no, binigyan kayo ng lupa ng government, okay? Halimbawa, binigyan kayo ng lupa ng government, so land, asset mo yon, di ba? Tapos, nagbigay ng condition si government. Sabihin sa ni government, okay, I will give you land pero patayuan mo siya ng building. Okay? Para yung building na yon gamitin ng mga taga dito sa bayan namin para magtrabaho, okay? Or create work, 'di ba? So in that case, until such time na hindi pa napupulfill yung condition na gumawa ng building, then that would be recorded as an unearned revenue under IAS number 20, unearned revenue from government grant. And you, as you all know, unearned revenue are considered as liability and obligation. So that's an example of conditional obligations or conditions as to a particular action, future action that would give rise to an obligation. And also, in some other cases, no, there would be an obligation that is uncertain na nag-exist siya. Parang pagmamahal lang. No, joke lang. Okay? So, when we talk about uncertainty, it will be discussed more on sa IAS number 37, which is, tama ba ako? Let me check. IAS 37 is more on provisions, contingencies, and contingent assets. Okay, IES numbers 37. Okay, very good. Tama. Okay. Baka kasi nalilimutan ko na yung standard number eh. Okay, so in IAS 37, okay, you will discuss there some sort of mga liabilities that are uncertain, kasi ang sabi naman po doon, liabilities are uncertain amount and timing that would be considered as provision, and provision is an example of a liability. So there will also be obligations that will be uncertain in terms of existence. Okay, and again, it qualifies doon sa specific standard na IAS 37 para masabi mo siya na obligation na siya or liability na siya agad-agad, or baka contingency po. Okay? So, any questions so far about obligation? I hope na you're still listening and understanding kung ano man po yung dinidiscuss ko dito, ha? Okay? So, and if you do have any questions, please key in your questions to our respective chat boxes. Okay? Okay? So, let's proceed. We're done with the obligation, no, na criteria. Next would be to transfer an economic resource. Kanina nabanggit natin that a liability is an obligation to transfer an economic resource. And economic resource is a right to produce potential benefit, hindi po ba? So we need to transfer an asset. Okay? So when we talk about transfer of an economic resource, no, to satisfy it, you should have the potential to pay or to transfer any resources to another party or parties. And you can transfer even though the probability of economic resource is low. Okay? So what are the means of transferring an economic resource? Either, no, you could pay it through cash. Kasi that's the typical one, no? If you do have liability or obligation, just pay it with cash. Now, if you don't have any cash, then you could also deliver goods or services, such as, actually, example nito yung unearned revenue, di ba? Kasi you are obliged, okay, has the responsibility to deliver the goods na binayaran in advance nung customer mo, okay, or services. Another would be in exchange of economic resources with another party, and take note po, it is unfavorable terms. Kanina, pag favorable terms, it's more on asset, okay? So we could exchange or give our non-cash assets, okay? Technically, it's unfavorable to us, and transfer economic resource if specified uncertain future event occurs. Okay, so kagaya kanina, di ba nabanggit ko that an obligation could be uncertain Another would be obligation to issue financial instruments if that financial instruments will oblige the entity to transfer an economic resource. So pwede rin pala na yung liability will be paid by another liability. Bigyan ko na kayo ng example dito, no? Let's say for example, you could use, let's say you have accounts payable, may utang ka na, and then you could not be able to pay it. Okay, and then you will issue a promissory note stating na magbabayad ka at this certain date. So that's actually an example of this bullet na we could issue same financial instruments that will oblige you to pay or transfer economic resources in the future. Okay. Also, take note that instead of fulfilling an obligation to transfer economic resource to another party that has right to receive the cash, entities sometimes decide to, okay, so pwede rin siya mag-decide to settle obligation by negotiating a release from that obligation. 'Di ba kanina on the previous slide, it's more on we are going to pay it or settle it with an economic resource na talagang payment and outflow of economic resource or asset. But in this case, no, you could be able to also be a negotiator or you could negotiate for the release of obligation. Pwede kang magmakaawa pag hindi ka na kayang makapagbayad, okay, ng obligation mo. You could have to ask for forgiveness and you could be able to ask for extension, for example. Okay? So example nito, pag kayo'y nasa nasa intermediate accounting 3, yung debt restructuring wherein you could ask for a forgiven accrued interest. Okay? Pwede bang hindi ko nabayaran yung interest kasi baka mabankrupt na ako. Okay? So that's also possible, no, to settle the obligations even though we are not transferring economic resource. Another would be transfer the obligation to another party. Let's say, for example, the entity could not be able to pay that obligation. And then, let's say, for example, okay, sige, pasuyo na lang, si bangko na lang ang babayaran ko in the future, then the bank will pay you na lang. Okay, so it's transferring the obligation to another party. So the other party will pay it first. And then, of course, your obligation will now be created to that third party. Or baka naman, di ba, you have already a vesting interest on that party na may pera ka naman pala doon, then okay, it will be used to settle that obligation. Also, to replace an obligation to transfer economic resource with another obligation by entering into new transactions. So, pwede po ito pagdating ninyo ng discussion ng debt restructuring. Okay, so wherein you will be restructuring the liability. Okay, restructuring. Okay. Okay, so you will have to replace it with a new liability. Okay, kasi baka mamaya yung terms and conditions of the old liability have already lapsed. Okay, so yun po yung about sa transfer of economic resource. So we could pay and transfer our own asset, or even sabi dito sa last slide na kakadiscuss lang natin, no, if you could not be able to transfer economic resource, then you could have also alternatives how to settle those obligations. Okay, so the last part of the discussion or criteria for the liability is it is a present obligation as a result of past events. Actually, we're talking about past events dito. Okay, kasi kanina we have already discussed obligation, and pag sinabi po nating obligations, okay, it's a duty or responsibility to transfer economic resource. Okay, so a present obligation as a result of past events, okay, exists only if, okay, number one, an entity has already obtained the economic benefits or taken an action. So meaning, let's say, purchase of goods, di ba? So you have already have the goods na delivered na sa'yo, okay, and you haven't paid it yet, then it would create already the obligation. Thus, the past event there is your because you have purchased the goods. Even yung example then is more on, let's say for example, you employee have already provided services to you, and then you haven't paid it yet until payroll. Okay, so that would be salaries payable. So again, okay, so you have already obtained the benefits from that action. That's why you are recording an obligation. Also, an obligation resulting from past event exists if, as a consequence, the entity will not or may have to transfer the economic resource that it would not otherwise have had to transfer. Okay, so um, eventually, kagaya rin po siya ng kanina, no, that you will have to transfer economic resources. Then, enactment of legislation is not itself sufficient to give an entity a present obligation. So, halimbawa po, no, let's say for example, ngayon, no, you are reporting already, financial reporting. Tapos, meron pong batas na effective next year. Okay? So, pag next year pa naman yung batas and you haven't violated that law enacted pa naman, then right now, no, it will not have an effect, no? Even though ngayon po na-approve, sabihin mo, ay, past event yan eh, di ba kasi na-approve ngayon eh. Pero the effectivity, okay, is not sufficient enough, no, to give rise to a present obligation. So it needs to be as a result of past events. So maybe previous law, no, that you have violated right now, then doon po mag-a-arise ang obligation naman. And also, a present obligation can exist even if a transfer of economic resource cannot be enforced until some point in time. So, we have this kaya nga nabanggit ko kanina sa inyo, 'di ba, that there would be some sort of conditions to fulfill, no, that you need to fulfill before you could settle the liability. Okay, so just like yung IS-20. So any questions so far? Clarification? Okay, so that's the end for liabilities. Again, the criteria are it should be an obligation. Okay, an obligation to transfer an economic resource, and it should be as a result of past events. Okay, so kanina nabanggit ko ho that assets, okay, can be accounted for, no, into a single, or various rights could be accounted for as single asset. So let's talk about units of account. Okay, so a unit of account in accordance with the conceptual framework is a right or a group of right. Okay, so it's referring to asset, a group of asset, no, or an obligation or a group of obligations. So kadi-discuss lang natin na liability, or even a group of rights and obligation to which recognition criteria and measurement concepts are applied. So if they are somehow, mamaya we will give an example of this unit of account, no. Sometimes it could be similar, or the similar rights, no, that you could present it as one, then it would be a unit of account already. And why is there a need for us to um, use a unit of account? So unit of account is selected to provide useful information, no, which implies, no, so kapag group kasi natin siya, the information provided about that asset o kaya liability, okay, and also the related income and expenses on that asset or liability must be relevant. So again, balik tayo sa relevance, no, you will report it as one. Okay, because it is relevant to the users na malaman niya as one na siya. And also, the information provided about the asset or liabilities and the related income and expenses must faithfully represent. So bumalik tayo sa qualitative characteristic kanina, that for us to use a unit of account, or pwede natin igrupo yung mga rights or assets or even liabilities, no, it should be relevant and it should be faithfully representing our financial information. Okay? So treating set of rights and obligation as single unit differs from offsetting the asset and liabilities. So pag sinabi kasi nating offsetting, it means na yung asset less the liabilities, no? I know that in your intermediate accounting na introduce na sa inyo malamang yung, or baka hindi pa, no, yung offsetting, no, because of the bank overdraft. Pero ayun nga, in this case, no, sabi naman po sa conceptual framework, so we could not treat it as offsetting. Okay, so because offsetting, as we discussed in IAS number 1, generally is not allowed. So pagsasama-samahin lang natin yung rights at saka single obligation into one. Okay, so what are those examples that we could have a unit of accounts? Okay, so it would possibly include, okay, an individual right or an individual obligation. So individual, so that could be unit of account already. O kaya naman all rights, all obligation, or all rights and obligation arising from single contract, for example. Okay, so contract base, so pwedeng you have an asset, no, that arises from contract. okay? And then you have a liability, so on which you could report it as single unit. Pero actually, I haven't seen pa yung mga single unit, since in past one, we will have a discussion of pagsamasamahin lang yung similar items into one line item, di ba? Such as sa cash and cash equivalents. That's aggregation naman pagdating natin ng um, IAS number 1. Okay, so subgroup of obligations or rights, even mga similar items or dissimilar items could also be grouped, and also some sort of risk exposure. So don't worry about units of accounts, because again, it's more on considering that various rights, okay, but have the same basis into one, okay, whether similar or dissimilar. Okay. Also mentioned in um, chapter 4, no, are executory contracts after the liability. So I know familiar kayo dito because you have already discussed it in Oblicon. Okay, so ano nga bang executory contract in accordance with the conceptual framework? It is a contract, no, or a portion of a contract that is equally unperformed. So ibig sabihin, 'di ba, ang contract will be extinguished if it was already been performed. Okay? So, pero dito, executory siya kapag unperformed yet. Okay? Both of the parties are unperformed, or neither of the parties have fulfilled the obligation, no? Or we have the the original um, person who drafts the contract and the one who is obligated, 'di ba? So pag either of them, okay, have not yet fulfilled that, or even both of the parties haven't fulfilled yet the obligation, or baka partially pa lang po, then that contract is considered as executory contract. Okay? So, ano nga ba to? A consecutory contract actually establish a combined right and obligation to exchange an economic resource. So, meaning there is still a liability from both of the parties, no, to do or not to do a certain thing. Okay, especially to transfer economic resource, and to the extent of either party fulfills the obligation under contract, now the contract is no longer executory. Okay? So, pag na-fulfill na po nung isa yung contract, kasi kanina sabi natin, no, neither of the party fulfilled any of the obligation. So, hindi niya ginalaw. Parehas sila na hindi pa gumagalaw sa obligation, or even both of the parties um, are partially fulfilling pa lang the obligations, okay, that's executory contract. Okay, pag na-fulfill na, let's say for example, party A and B, so pag si B ay na-fulfill niya na yung contract, okay, so tapos na siya, then it's no longer executory. Okay? So, are we good on that? Okay, so the obligation from both parties, if not yet fulfilled, is considered as liability. Yun lang yung point natin dito, bakit natin binabanggit si executory contract. Okay. So, let's proceed now with another element. Okay, so konti na lang po as to the elements. So, we have the equity na. Okay, so, or capital. Pero in the conceptual framework, maybe nung kayo po ay nasa basic accounting, you have, kumbaga sinasabi nyo na equity is either the equity of the liability, or equity of the creditor, or liabilities or equity of the owners, no, capital. But actually, in the conceptual framework, the term equity is referring to the capital itself. Okay, so it will not be anymore, can be classified as liability. So, pag ang equity na ginamit, no, in accordance with the conceptual framework, it means that it is the residual interest of the assets after deducting the liability. So, eventually, in the accounting equation, that's equity is equal to the asset less the liabilities. So, it is the claim of the or equity claims naman, pag sinabing claims, okay, that's a claim on the interest. Okay, so pag equity, residual interest. Pag equity claims, it's the claim on the residual interest. But technically, sa elements natin, it's equity. Okay, so that equity could be shares of stocks, of course, for the entity who are issuing shares of stocks, or even on some other aspects in sole proprietorship, that's the excess of the asset after the liabilities. Okay, so this equity, okay, has different classes of equity claims. Okay, so as discussed in your corporation accounting, okay, which will also be discussed to you in your shareholders equity, no, pagdating ninyo ng intermediate accounting 3, no, you have different classes of shares. You have ordinary and preference shares. I hope na naaalala nyo pa po yan. Binanggit po yan sa conceptual framework. And they are given the rights, of course, for dividends, di ba? May dividends tayong binibigay. And also to proceed or to have a proceeds after satisfying equity claims either through liquidation or even part at other times and other equity claims natin. Okay, so they have the rights, no? Itong mga shareholders na to or having ordinary or preference shares have their own rights. No, I will not discuss the right of each of these shareholders, no, because it might be discussed already to you there and not part of this conceptual framework. Okay, so or even you will discuss it further pa pagdating ng intermediate accounting 3 for the shareholders equity. Bigyan ko na lang kayo ng example, di ba? You have the preemptive rights, di ba? So, the given right to acquire the shares, no, first before it was being offered to the public. Okay? So, actually, may mga ultra vires rights pa doon sa corporation law, but we will not discuss that. Okay? So, I'm just mentioning that there are rights by this shares under equity claims. Okay? And finally, no, the last two elements na maiksi lang po yung discussion sa conceptual framework are referring to income and expenses. Take note guys that income yung ginamit sa standard and I'm not sure kung na-discuss din ito sa inyo sa FABM but when I discuss income, ang sabi ko doon dati, income encompasses both revenues and gains. Okay, so eventually, ito pong particular na income is the general term, no? The revenue is actually an income coming from what? Ordinary course of business. Okay, halimbawa, nagbebenta ka ng um, let's say merchandise. Okay? Tapos nakabenta ka ng merchandise, so you have sales. So that sales is actually a revenue since it arises from the ordinary course of business. That's your usual. Now, if it is not arising from the ordinary course of business, then that would be gain. So ibig sabihin that's unusual. Kaya in the future, now once you see revenue and gains, I hope na do not interchange it since the definition are different from each other. At the same time, no, income naman, kapag ginamit yung word na income, it would refer to either revenue or gains. So, okay lang din naman po yun. Okay? So, in accordance with the conceptual framework, your income is an increase in asset. Okay, so medyo na siya, technical na. Dati kasi in the 2010 version, ang simulain ng definition ng income is that income is an inflow of economic resource. Ganun yung introduction niya. Pero ngayon, direct to the point, increases in asset. So bakit po may increase in asset? Diba? Halimbawa, pag nagbenta ka, you debit cash, which is an asset, and you credit revenue or sales. Diba? So there is an increase in asset because you have an income. Also, there is a decrease in liability. So ano bang example ng decrease in liability natin? Diba? We have to debit unearned revenue. Okay? So ito talaga yung example niyan eh. We have the unearned revenue, okay, which is a liability, 'di ba? Okay, once you fulfill already the obligation, then it will now become a revenue. Okay? So nagkakaroon tayo ng income even though revenue siya, no? If there is a decrease in liability. Okay, that will result in an increase in equity. So kasi 'di ba, that income pagdating ng closing entry, as you all know in basic accounting, will be transferred to your equity or income summary muna, then equity account. Okay, so it will increase the equity, but also in higher accounting, that income will be closed to the retained earnings account, as you all know in corporation accounting. Okay, that's why it will also increase the overall stockholders equity account, no? Other than the contributions of the holders, which is actually referring to the investments. Okay, so eventually investments are not considered as income of the company. Okay, so kaya nga other than investments. So again, when we talk about income, it may somehow be an inflow of resources arising from the ordinary course of business or not in the ordinary course of business, which causes the asset to increase and the liabilities to decrease. Okay. So that's regarding the income. I hope po naiintindihan pa po natin ha. Again, if you do have any questions, please let me know. Okay? So, burahin ko lang po siya so that I could explain as well expenses. So, next would be expenses naman. So, pag sinabi expenses dati in the 2010 version, ang simula ng definition was expenses is an outflow of resources, 'di ba? Outflow of resources natin. But by this time, ngayon po sa definition natin, it started with the decrease in asset. Okay? So pag nag-decrease ang asset, there is an expense. What is an example of the decrease in asset? Okay? So let's say in the case of prepaid expense, 'di ba? You will be debiting expense and then you will be crediting what? Prepaid expense. Why is there a need for us to record it? Because okay, it entails na we have what? We have used already that particular asset. Okay, so the asset decreases. Then also, aside from that, increase in liability naman. So there is an increase in liability, no? Because we have already used the services and haven't paid it yet. So example of which is, let's say for example, you have salaries expense, di ba? Kasi na-use mo na yung services and haven't paid yet the services, so you have salaries payable. So in that case, no, it gives more already the specifics to the entries or transactions, no, on the definition of income and expense. And to finish the definition of expense, nakalagay po dito that it will result as a decrease in the equity, no? Kasi 'di ba, expenses will simply decrease the retained earnings, 'di ba? Kung sakali man or even pag minatch mo na siya sa income, it would be decreasing the amount of income to become net income na i-close naman natin sa um, retained earnings. Okay? So, other than distributions to equity. So, ibig sabihin, itong distributions na to, kung kanina, yung increase or contribution is investment, ito naman po, it's more on the dividends or what? Withdrawal. So, hindi natin pwede i-consider na expense yung dividends at saka withdrawal kapag sake ng ano. Kasi sa corporation, dividends ang tawag doon. But for partnership at saka sole proprietorship, it's more on withdrawal of amount from the company. Okay? So that's income and expense. Sir, part ba nung expenses yung losses? Yes, no? Since losses is also entailing any decrease in an asset and also increase in liability. Okay? So under ng expense yung losses. Okay? So that's chapter 4. Last chapter na lang po tayo. I hope that you can still hold on, no, on our discussion. And please, if you do have any questions, please key in your questions to our chat box. Okay, so para na akong DJ dito, di ba? Okay, anyway, so we are down now to the last chapter. Okay, so the last chapter for today's discussion is chapter 5, no, which is referring to recognition and derecognition. So this recognition and derecognition will be used, no, for the discussion of your assets and liabilities and other elements of the financial statements and other subjects, no, so that you will be able to know when are you going to record and when are you going to eliminate it in the record. Okay, so let's start the discussion on recognition. Okay, so ano bang ibig sabihin ng recognition? Ang sabi po, in the conceptual framework, recognition is the process of capturing inclusions. So, ilalagay po siya saan? Sa statement of financial position o kaya naman sa statement of financial performance, which is actually your statement of comprehensive income or income statement, which meets the definition of one or more elements of the financial statements. So, kapag na-meet niya yung definition doon sa diniscuss na natin kaninang elements, you are going to recognize it. And in simple term, no, itong recognition means recording, no? You are going to record, you're going to include that element, okay, whether asset man siya, liability, equity, or income or expense, no, in our financial statements. Okay? Sir, ano ba yung basic premise, no? Dati kasi, it should be probable and record and measured reliably. Yun po yung basis dati ng recognition in the 2010 version. Okay? And also in other standards, no, sa mga specific standards, ganun po yung sinasabi that you will recognize it once it is probable. Okay? Probable that there would be an outflow of resources, probable that there would be an inflow of resources, and also the amount could be measured reliably. Okay? So yun po yung sinasabi dati in the 2010 version and even sa mga accounting standard na specific. Okay? Pero ngayon, in the 2018 version, ang sabi, for as long as it meets the definition of the element, automatic you will recognize it. Okay? So sa asset kanina, di ba, as part of the recognition criteria would be we should have the right, no? There should be a control over the asset. Okay, and we could get the potential benefit out of it. Sa liabilities naman, okay, we have an obligation arising from past event, okay, that would transfer an economic resource. So yun yung mga part ng definition natin. And equity is more on the excess or residual interests. Okay, so but again, if it meets the definition of that element of the financial statement, automatic you will include that in the financial statement. Now, it involves as well yung recognition natin depicting items in one of those statements, okay, either alone o kaya aggregation. So, pwede pong individual o kaya aggregated with some other items. Pag sinabing aggregation, no, pwede natin siyang isama in one term sa financial statement, no, such as example ko na lang na may encounter nyo siguro ngayon, no, yung sa cash and cash equivalents. So once you prepared it in the balance sheet, cash and cash equivalents, no, it includes already various items such as, okay, petty cash, cash on hand, cash on bank, okay, they are already at one, no, and aggregated. Basta ni-recognize nyo. Or it could be just like you alone. Okay, joke lang. Okay. Also, recognition links elements, okay, of the financial position and financial performance or the income statement. Kasi, 'di ba, nabanggit din kanina that example sa income, 'di ba? Income is an increase in asset. So, ibig sabihin, pag merong asset na ni-record, then it means that there is also an income. Okay, so yun yung nagbibigay ng link sa atin from balance sheet and income statement. Also, example, 'di ba, liabilities. Pag may increase in liability, malamang there is also a correlated expenses. Okay? So that's how recognition works. Okay, so clear po ba tayo doon? So what are the recognition criteria right now based on our conceptual framework? Okay? So, dati, ang recognition principle nga na nabanggit ko kanina, no, it should be probable and could be measured reliably. But by this time, no, only items that meets the definition of the elements, whether asset, liability, equity, okay, for the sake of the financial position. Also, if it meets the definition of income and expenses in the statement of financial performance, that's when you are going to record it in our financial statements. Okay, of course, you need to take into consideration as well that these elements, okay, should be useful, okay, to be recognized. So meaning it should be relevant and used for faithful representing the financial information. Okay. Okay. So kanina, 'di ba, we could recognize immediately if we meet the definition. However, also in the discussion of the elements, 'di ba, even sa asset at sa liabilities kanina, sometimes there would be uncertainty that would exist, 'di ba? If it is uncertain, then most likely baka hindi pa siya i-record as liability or even i-record as asset. But okay, let's try to discuss some definitions of uncertainties and types of uncertainties. Okay, so let's have, okay, the first one, no, existence uncertainty. Okay, and the other one would be measurement uncertainty. Okay, so sa existence uncertainty, okay, it is an uncertainty wherein you are uncertain of the existence of a liability or asset. Nandyan pa ba siya? Or baka wala na siya? Joke lang, okay? So, i-record ko ba siya or hindi? Kasi baka hindi pa. Okay? So, anong action natin dito sa existence uncertainty? No? Technically, ang existence uncertainty, you can check that, let's say, for example, next, nabigay ko kanina, no, yung IAS number 37, such as yung provision, no? A provision is a liability of uncertain amount and timing. Okay? Pero ito kasi, you are talaga uncertain na nag-exist ba siya. May liability ba ako or may asset ako? If that's the case that you are not sure whether it exists or not, or there is a doubt of existence, then most likely baka hindi pa siya i-recognize, no? Pwedeng disclosure pa lang siya sa notes kasi you are not yet certain, 'di ba? Example, yung sa court ruling kanina, no? If not yet being ruled by the party and hindi pa naman po sinabing probable or baka wala pa pong percentage of probability, then most likely the existence is a compromise, thus baka hindi mo muna siya i-record. Okay? But also, no, we have measurement uncertainty. Ito naman ho, measurement uncertainty, this happens only if you know that it is existing, 'di ba? Ang problema mo lang sa measurement uncertainty is that, okay, magkano ko siya i-measure or magkano ko siya i-record? Kanina, itong existence uncertainty, i-record ko na ba siya or hindi? Okay, itong measurement uncertainty, naka-record na siya or mai-record na siya, pero magkano? Okay? Usually in that case that there would be uncertainty. Bakit po? Bakit uncertain? Kasi baka yung liability or asset is based on estimates, no? So you need to record based on estimate. By the way, guys, the discussion of the estimates or the amounts to be recorded in our financial statement will further be discussed in chapter 6, which is measurement. Okay, that would be in another video presentation already. Okay, so these are the two uncertainties. Okay, don't worry in your individual discussions of the assets and liabilities, no, pwede matakal sa inyo yung existence uncertainty and of course measurement uncertainties such as estimates. Okay? So lastly, no, as part of this chapter 5, we have derecognition. Kanina, recognition, which is more on inclusion pa lang sa financial statements. Ilalagay ko ba siya, i-record book ba siya sa financial statements? Ito naman, pag derecognition, okay, so it acted more on the removal. Okay, removal of all, okay, or parts of that recognized element of the financial statement. But it is more on asset and liabilities kasi kapag equity, no, dinirecognize it somehow withdrawal or what, pero we do not derecognize immediately on that case, no. Ang term na derecognition is usually maririnig nyo po for assets and liabilities. Okay, so removal. Sir, bakit po i-remove? Okay, it's because, no, it no longer meets the definition of an asset or a liability. Okay? So, limbawa, for the case of asset, you derecognize or you remove that asset if you have already loses the control of all or parts of the assets. So, example, di ba, kapag sinabi natin derecognition, actually, if you're going already to, let's say, for example, you have a PPE. Yung PPE na yon is hindi mo na magagamit. Okay? Over-depreciated na. Kaya naman nasira na, 'di ba? Okay, so you don't have already the control over that. Ano pa i-control mo kung sira na rin naman? Okay. Pero anyways, ayun nga. If you have loses the control or even you have already lose getting the benefit out of that asset, then you will derecognize that already. So pag sinabing derecognition, tatanggalin na nga natin siya as an asset. Okay? So it's either you sell it, 'di ba? Pwede rin na ang reason bakit mo dinide-recognize is because you have already sold that asset. Okay? O kaya naman you are just going to throw it away at hindi na siya magiging part ng operations mo. Okay? On the liability naman po, pag sinabing derecognition, you have no longer a present obligation. So, usually, kaya nagkakaroon ng no longer present obligation, you have already settled it or bayad na. Tama ba ako spelling na settle? Tama. Okay, bayad na. Okay, you paid it through cash. Kanina, di ba, we have discussed the various ways how to extinguish or settle the obligations. Either you pay it through cash, you pay it with another equity securities or other non-cash assets. So, yun po yung usual, no? Pag nabayaran na or you have created another liability. So, yung example ko rin kanina, yung accounts payable na isang liability, no? So, kapag let's say hindi mo nabayaran, you have issued a promissory note, then tatanggalin mo na yung accounts payable, you will record a new one. Okay? So, the recognition could either be resulting to or could result to okay, talagang elimination already or removal of the asset and liabilities, or it could create actually another liability or even asset. Okay? So, in terms of accounting treatment for recognition, no, the recognition rather, it aims for uh, faithfully representing both. Okay, any assets or liabilities will retain after transactions or other events that would lead to the recognition. Okay, so pwede po may mag-retain pa na certain parts, no, just like what you will discuss in um, leases, no, baka meron pang na-retained na rights sa'yo ng asset mo, then you could retain it, okay, even in terms of liabilities, okay, and also change in entities assets or liabilities as a result of transaction or other events. So that's um that's the accounting treatment for the recognition. Okay, so ang point lang, pag pina-entryhan sa inyo, ang sabihin sa inyo, okay, derecognize a PPE. So you credit the PPE itself. Now, kapag nagpa-derecognize or nagpabayad na ng liability, then you debit the liability. So that's how derecognition works. Okay? So with that, guys, okay, so that's the end of chapter 5. I hope that you're still doing good dyan, no? Kahit medyo mahaba itong discussion natin. Actually, it's already 2 hours, okay? So pasensya na sometimes kung paulit-ulit yung mga discussions since we need to put an emphasis, and also in that conceptual framework, it was already indicated there na halos paulit-ulit din yung some parts naman. Okay, so we're done with the first 5 chapters. I hope na naintindihan nyo po. And for our next video, I will be presenting to you the last 3 remaining chapters, no, which are yung measurement. We have also the capital maintenance concepts, and also the ano pa ba isa nakalimutan ko. Okay, the presentation and disclosure. Okay, so again, if you do have any questions, please key in your questions to our respective chat boxes. Okay, so again, thank you very much for listening, guys, and stay safe and God bless. See you on our next video. So this is again your instructor for the conceptual framework and accounting standards. Okay, see you guys. Bye bye. Kamsahamnida.